Today's submitted material is a draft investigative article examining the legal and procedural accountability of enforcement vehicles in fatal crashes, anchored by the recent tragic immigration truck collision in Kuala Lumpur and analyzed through the lens of Section 41 of the Road Transport Act 1987.
Integrating the human tragedy of the recent collision directly with the procedural legal statutes will create a much more compelling and urgent narrative drive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because right now, the draft kind of builds this distinct wall between the harrowing facts of the August 19th crash and the academic analysis of the criminal litigation process.
Right, it's like two separate articles almost.
Exactly. The reader wades through these really dry procedural stages of arrest and remand, and in doing so, they just completely lose the emotional stakes of the actual event. The legal sections start to feel, well, just disconnected and overly theoretical.
Yeah, I noticed that too. The writer relies really heavily on the Azir, Arasan, and Jafar framework to structure that legal analysis.
Yes, they do.
And for those looking closely at the text, that framework is essentially it's a roadmap, right? Mapping out the life cycle of a criminal charge in Malaysia.
Right, from the very beginning.
Yeah, like from the moment the handcuffs go on, through the remand proceedings, right up to the final verdict. It's a very precise academic tool, but as it's written in this draft right now, it reads kind of like a criminal justice textbook.
Yeah, it really does.
It just lists stage 1 through stage 6 in a total vacuum.
And to fix this, the writer really needs to map the victim's actual timeline directly onto those legal stages.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, because the timeline of the immigration truck driver's experience over those subsequent 24 hours, it provides the perfect vehicle to illustrate these steps.
Right.
For instance, rather than simply defining stage 2, remand proceedings using the criminal procedure code, the writer should detail how the police obtained a specific one-day remand order for both the lorry driver and the Proton Saga driver involved in the Jalan Sultan Ismail crash.
Oh, I see.
That takes an abstract legal concept and turns it into reality. You have a driver sitting in a holding cell while investigators try to piece together why 3 people are dead.
Yeah, explaining the law in a vacuum like that, it's like explaining how a car engine works by just, reading the manual to someone.
Right.
Whereas weaving it into the tragedy, that's like showing the engine failing on a busy highway.
That's a great way to put it.
You have to, separating the law from the narrative in this way, it's like showing the jury the bullet, but refusing to show them the gun.
Exactly.
The legal statutes, Section 41 in this case, they are the bullet. But the departmental standard operating procedures, the human decisions made by that driver at 1 a.m., that is the gun.
Yes.
You have to show them firing together.
You really do.
So if you explain the transition from stage 1, the investigation phase, to stage 3, the charge phase, you should detail exactly how the Kuala Lumpur Traffic Investigation and Enforcement Department completed their 24-hour investigation and referred the paper to the Attorney General's chambers on August 20th.
Right, and overlaying that legal timeline with the human timeline, it really forces the reader to feel the weight of the law acting upon the individuals involved.
Yeah.
While the JSP's 24-hour clock is, ticking down under stage 1, the grieving brother-in-law, Mohammed Nazri Rosali, is publicly demanding a transparent probe.
Man, that detail was so heavy.
It is. He's questioning why wallets and car keys are missing from the wreckage. And he's waiting for updates on his sister, Nur Hayati, who is, fighting for her life in the ICU.
Right.
Interlacing the cold mechanics of the legal framework with the profound, immediate grief of the family grounds the legal theory in this devastating reality.
Yeah, it makes it real. It makes the reader actually care about stage 1 and stage 2.
Exactly. Now moving on, expanding the legal analysis beyond the basic text of Section 41 to scrutinize the specific operational parameters of emergency vehicles will significantly sharpen the article's core argument.
Okay, yeah, because the draft brings in some really excellent historical context here, right?
It does, yeah.
Specifically, that I think it was a 2007 UETM academic paper by Errol Irwan bin Lehman and his colleagues.
Right, the one that looks at judicial hesitation?
Yeah, the hesitation to hand down maximum sentences for reckless driving.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The draft heavily relies on that 2007 paper's general observation regarding judicial leniency, but it misses a vital nuance.
Okay, what is it?
Treating all reckless driving under Section 41 as a monolith is a flawed approach,
Ah, I see what you mean.
right? A civilian speeding because they are, late for work or driving recklessly under the influence is fundamentally different in the eyes of policy than a state-operated heavy enforcement vehicle running a red light.
Right, right.
The writer should explicitly contrast the general application of Section 41 with the highly specific, strict operational protocols that govern government enforcement vehicles to expose the lethal gap between protocol and practice.
Okay, but wait, let me push back on that for a second. Let me play devil's advocate here.
Sure, go ahead.
Isn't running a red light with a siren technically covered under the umbrella of momentary inattention if the driver simply misjudged the intersection?
Well,
Because the 2007 research distinguishes between accidents caused by momentary inattention versus those caused by selfish disregard.
right. It does make that distinction.
So if an immigration truck driver has their siren and beacons on, their assumption is the traffic will stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
If a civilian car doesn't stop and a collision occurs, the driver misjudged the civilian's reaction. From a purely legal standpoint, doesn't that fall into the category of inattention rather than a deliberate selfish disregard for the law?
Not for enforcement vehicles, no. And that is exactly the distinction the writer needs to hammer home.
Oh, okay.
Civilians' misjudgment is inattention. An enforcement officer, however, is bound by strict visual clearance SOPs.
Ah, the visual clearance.
Exactly. They do not have an absolute overriding right of way simply because a siren is active.
Right, it's not a magic shield.
No, not at all. They are trained that they must ensure traffic is aware and that conditions are entirely safe before proceeding against a red light. Deliberately ignoring those strict visual clearance protocols to barrel through an intersection is not a momentary lapse. It is a systemic, selfish disregard for established safety rules.
Wow, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there actually is precedent the writer can use to firmly establish this, right?
Yes, there is.
Specifically, the 2021 Sungai Sukwit ambulance crash.
That's the one.
In the aftermath of that collision, the JSPT explicitly clarified the legal standing of emergency vehicles. They stated plainly that emergency vehicles cannot ignore red lights at will, and the burden of safety remains squarely on the enforcement driver to clear the intersection.
Right.
The draft mentions this precedent, but it kind of just leaves it buried.
It really does. It just glosses over it.
Yeah.
Bringing it to the forefront fundamentally shifts the legal analysis from a question of generic reckless driving to a question of explicit protocol violation.
Absolutely. And we also need to dig into the physics of how these protocols fail in reality, which the draft touches on through some primary reactions from Facebook commenters.
Oh, yeah, the commenters were super interesting.
They were.
Prakash Pataya and Asghar Bai brought up the acoustic reality of sirens in a city.
Mm-hmm.
In a dense urban environment like Kuala Lumpur, sound waves from a siren bounce off the concrete facades of skyscrapers, creating an urban canyon effect.
Right, right.
The sound arrives at a civilian driver from multiple directions simultaneously.
Yeah, and you have to combine that acoustic echo with the physical environment of a modern vehicle.
Oh, definitely.
Like, think about a civilian driver sitting in a Proton Saga with the windows rolled up, the air conditioning running, and the radio on.
Yeah.
They are heavily insulated from exterior noise. When they finally do hear the siren, the echo effect makes it nearly impossible for their brain to accurately pinpoint the direction of the approaching enforcement vehicle in those critical seconds before entering an intersection.
Exactly. And exploring that physical reality highlights exactly why the JSPT places the burden of safety on the enforcement driver.
Yeah, it totally debunks the idea that a siren is enough.
Right, the assumption that a siren acts as a magic wand to clear an intersection completely ignores the acoustics of a city and the soundproofing of modern cars. The writer can use this intersection of physics and law to prove that relying solely on a siren without visual clearance is inherently reckless.
And there was another commenter in the draft's research too, Lim Kok Ing,
Yes.
who brought up a crucial operational question regarding the nature of the emergency itself.
This was such a good point.
It really was. Why is an immigrations truck picking up undocumented migrants from a chow kit operation at 1 a.m. operating under the same traffic protocols as a cardiac ambulance?
Right.
A post-operation detainee transport is not a life-or-death medical emergency that justifies blowing through a red light at high speeds in a heavy commercial vehicle.
It really isn't. And scrutinizing the immigration department's specific operational parameters here adds a massive layer of depth to the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
The writer should force the reader to ask what legally defines an emergency in the context of beacon and siren use.
Yeah, who gets to decide that?
Exactly. Does the transportation of detained individuals back to a depot warrant overriding traffic laws? Or is that a misapplication of emergency protocols designed for first responders? Questioning the baseline necessity of the speed and the siren exposes a potential systemic flaw that goes far beyond a single driver's decision.
Yeah, because if we agree that the legal framework currently excuses systemic negligence by blaming momentary inattention, then the writer can't just end the article by sending the driver to jail.
No, they can't.
The conclusion has to attack the system itself.
Right, and transforming the conclusion from a simple summary of the ongoing investigation into a proactive call for systemic reform will elevate the piece's overall significance.
Yeah, for sure.
As it stands, the draft ends entirely passively. It notes that the investigation paper is being forwarded to the AGC, and it mentions the heartbreaking detail that the family is holding a funeral for Sheikh Mohammed Firdaus and his 2 daughters in Kampong Air Hitam Labu.
Right, it's very sad, but it just kind of ends there.
Yeah, structurally, it leaves the readers simply waiting for a news update, feeling sorrow and helplessness, without guiding them toward reflecting on a systemic fix to prevent future tragedies.
Right, because we are looking at guidelines and SOPs for detainee transport that were likely drafted decades ago.
Probably, yeah.
In an era when traffic density and urban infrastructure in Kuala Lumpur were entirely different, the conclusion needs to address why these transports are happening at 1:00 a.m. without any dedicated traffic support.
Exactly.
It comes down to resource allocation and outdated operational habits. Synthesizing the public outcry with concrete demands for policy change pivots the reader's energy from passive mourning into a demand for active reform.
And the writer should combine the academic recommendations from that 2007 UITM paper with the current political reality to form this conclusion.
Okay, how so?
Well, the 2007 paper suggested setting up an independent advisory body for judges and increasing media awareness regarding the realities of Section 41.
Right.
The draft should synthesize those historical academic suggestions with the current Immigration Director General's active public promise to review their standard operating procedures following this crash. Bringing the past academic theory into dialogue with the present administrative promises creates a roadmap for actual change.
Okay, but let me ask you this. If we focus the conclusion too heavily on the overarching departmental SOPs, is there a risk that we dilute the individual accountability of the driver? Because the reader shouldn't just walk away thinking the driver was just a helpless cog in a badly designed machine. Section 41 exists to punish individual reckless choices, like choosing not to visually clear an intersection.
Well, systemic reform complements individual justice. It doesn't replace it.
Okay, that's a good way to frame it.
Right. Sending a single driver to prison under Section 41 treats the symptom of the crash. Overhauling how and when heavy enforcement vehicles are permitted to breach traffic laws treats the underlying disease.
Ah, I see. The conclusion can suggest specific, actionable, operational changes derived directly from the mechanics of the crash. For example, mandating police outriders for all non-urgent heavy detainee transports.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And understanding how a mandated escort fundamentally alters the legal liability matrix is crucial here.
Yes, exactly.
Because if departmental policy requires a police outrider for a 1 a.m. transport, the burden of securing the intersection shifts entirely.
Right.
The outrider arrives first, halts the civilian traffic physically, secures the perimeter, and only then does the heavy transport vehicle proceed through the red light.
Exactly.
The enforcement driver is no longer relying on acoustic sirens bouncing off buildings. They're relying on a physically secured route.
Right, it takes the guesswork out of it.
Yeah. If the writer outlines actionable solutions like this, the conclusion unifies the family's call for justice with a systemic demand for preventative reform.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to pull all of this together, the writer has 3 distinct areas for structural and analytical revision.
Okay, let's recap them.
First, map the rigid procedural stages of the Azir-Arison criminal litigation framework directly onto the unfolding timeline of the victims and their families to maintain the narrative's emotional momentum.
Right, bring the human element into the dry legal text.
Exactly. Second, move the legal analysis beyond generic reckless driving by explicitly contrasting Section 41 with the strict visual clearance protocols and acoustic limitations placed on emergency right-of-way.
Yeah, highlight that difference between a civilian and an enforcement officer.
Right. And finally, synthesize the conclusion into a concrete call for SOP reform, transforming a passive news update into a demand for systemic change.
Fantastic. We highly encourage the writer to implement these revisions. We would love to invite you to submit your next draft back to us for further review so we can see how the piece evolves. By weaving the human cost inextricably into the legal framework, this article has the power to not just document a grinding failure of the system, but to demand a system that actually protects the people waiting at the traffic light.